So now we come to Indian society. Now things only get a bit more complicated. What is this Indian society? How do you define Indian society? A society that is Indian? Yeah, unity and diversity. कब से पढ़ा रहे हैं हम लोगों को ये? बाप रे, मतलब this has been going on for decades now, and we are not tired of it. Unity and diversity. आएगा ये भी. We'll look into this as well. So unity and diversity. But let's forget the rhetoric. Let's come to. So in what ways Indian society can then be thought about? Or let's just straight away. Why wait? Let's straight away look into this entire phrase. Salient features of Indian society. क्या मतलब हुआ इसका? Features that in many ways are again defining vis-a-vis Indian society. It's quite a task. Salient features of Indian society. Well, बिल्कुल एकदम वहीं से ही शुरू करेंगे. We'll start on the most negative note. But before that, see, we have to also, yes. And what does that do? That comparison, what does that yield? No, I won't go down that lane. I don't want to become this brazen patriot who says ours is the best society. No, I'm sorry. Ours is an incredible society, but there are incredible societies all around the world, right? And I'm not into, matlab, that's my position. Let's figure out who's more incredible. I don't think that's the point. I think we are all incredible in different ways. But yes, diversity-wise, India is alarming. It's a miracle that India still exists. If you look at the diversity of India, India is a miracle in itself. The very fact that India has not really torn apart is in itself a miracle. I would say it's the proof of God's existence, right? But let's not go there. आप बताइए. नहीं जाएंगे इसमें. देखिए फिर ये जो वेस्टर्न और इंडियन है ये 200-300 साल से चल रहा है, इसे रहने दीजिए. हाँ, इंडियन सोसाइटी के बारे में बात करें ना, उसके लिए वेस्टर्न सोसाइटी की धज्जियां उड़ाने की क्या ज़रूरत है? उनको करने दीजिए वो लोग जो कर रहे हैं. सो इफ़ आई वर टू टेक अ क्लास समवेयर इन यूरोप, फिर वो भी यही बोलेंगे हमारे बारे में, दीज आर ऑल स्नेक चार्मर्स, वी आर द एनलाइटेंड फोक्स. So let's resist that temptation. So let's define let's think about Indian society on its own terms, right? हाँ, but usse pehle, so yeah, I'm sorry, that actually came across as a question. But let's also think about this as an interesting exercise of what we call defamiliarizing ourselves. Defamiliarizing matlab, see, something we have been very intimately associated with, we don't tend to think about it that often. जो चीज़ हमारे जितने करीब होती है वो critical gaze से बच जाती है, right? In fact, 17th, 18th century में there were several great philosophers who made this point that for reality to be conceptualized, you need to have a distance. तो अगर आप किसी चीज़ को अपनी आँख के बिल्कुल करीब रख देंगे तो आप, it's a blurred vision, right? So there is a certain distance that you need to have in order to make sense of the thing that you're trying to make sense of. Now, because we've been Indians all along and we've been raised in a certain cultural, social milieu, we don't think about it, right? So take an example. Let me just offer an illustration here. So let's say, just giving an example, let's say you are visited by a friend from Western Europe. राइट मान लीजिए कि आपके कोई दोस्त हैं जो कहीं यूरोप में कहीं से आए एंड यू टेकिंग अ स्ट्रोल, आप चल रहे हैं उनके साथ, एंड देन सडनली दिस पर्सन ड्रॉज योर अटेंशन टू समथिंग दैट यू नेवर पेड अटेंशन टू. इट हैपन्स वेरी ऑफन. उसके लिए उतनी दूर से आने की भी ज़रूरत नहीं है. यू कैन वेरी वेल हैव समवन फ्रॉम अनदर स्टेट इन दिल्ली, बिकॉज those of us who've been living in Delhi for decades, we tend to take things for granted. But you're visited by someone, you have somebody who is from a reasonably distant region, and suddenly this person is flagging pointers, questions that you never thought about. Now this is what we call defamiliarizing. वो इसलिए है क्योंकि उनको that person looks at everything from a very different lens and vice versa. आप उनके यहाँ पे जाएंगे not to settle the scores. It's not कि तुमने मेरे यहाँ आकर के वो सब बताया था तो मैं भी तुम्हें बताता हूँ. Quite naturally, you end up pointing out things to him or her that this person never really paid attention to. Now, this is what we call defamiliarizing. So, what we are discussing right now is also an exercise about defamiliarizing ourselves. You have to become a stranger to your own society. Only then you have to kind of get out and look at it from a distance so as to understand it better, right? So, salient features of Indian society. It's actually going back to something that we were discussing earlier. What are the things that you have to discuss, deliberate on if you have to develop an understanding of Indian society? वो कौन सी ऐसी बातें हैं जिन पे बात किए बगैर your discussion or your deliberation in Indian society is incomplete, right? So these are the things that we have to think about, that these are the defining aspects. So these are the fundamental features, salient features of Indian society. Clear? So that's the premise. That's our starting point. Let's start on that. So someone said caste. Should we start with that? I will not discuss caste right away, but let's just have a list with us. Oh wow, all gone. I hope आप लोगों को देखने की तो उसमें कुछ ज़रूरत थी नहीं ना तो. So let's just, so I'll just again work with a list. So think about those salient features. So we have started with but इसको लेके एक counter question है मेरे पास. So we've been told by various ethnographers, and in fact it's documented, that there is caste in Philippines, there is caste in Indonesia, there is caste in Cambodia, there's caste in Sri Lanka, caste in Bangladesh, you name it, Pakistan. There's caste in Bangladesh, और कहाँ था? Yes, Indonesia, Malaysia. So basically Far East, Southeast Asia, South Asia. तो ये कैसे चलेगा यहाँ पे? No, we must say that. Can नहीं. We have to say that. Most unapologetically. But सवाल ये है कि अगर ये इंडियन सोसाइटी का salient feature है तो ये कंबोडिया में क्या कर रहा है? It's there in Pakistan, it's there in Bangladesh, it's there in Sri Lanka, Nepal. Excellent ethnographies on caste practices. But not, sorry, I'll just finish this. But Malaysia, Indonesia तो part of India. ये तो अखंड भारत वाला logic इतना तो नहीं जाएगा आगे. हाँ, so let's get the argument. So the argument is that it actually originated in India and it traveled, thanks to what Indians carry with them. It traveled to all parts of Asia. You know, that's our contribution to Asian whatever practices. Okay, so we'll come to this. Ji. Yeah, so as we were, so yes, it started here. So शुरुआत तो इस मतलब the virus essentially originated somewhere in India, God knows where. And then, of course, Indians being casteist, wherever they traveled, they took caste along and they nurtured it wherever they lived for generations. So that's why we have instances. Of course, these societies are not as casteist as Indian society, but of course, their caste practices are to be found. And not just, in fact, now there are ethnographies that tell us about caste in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is the last destination for caste for you, but welcome to the world. Yeah, Silicon Valley is damn casteist. So what do you do about that? So anyways, so caste is definitely an important feature of Indian society. What else? Religion. Ek second. So religion, how's that? आप मेरा यूज कर रही हैं मैंने कहा था अभी पीछे sentimental. No, of course that's true. But then what about Vatican? उससे ज़्यादा religious कौन होगा? हाँ. Why does it? Yes, but I was just thinking about centrality of religion. Argument बिल्कुल सही है, but इसको और fine tune करना है. So for example, I can give, let's say I can think about Saudi Arabia, where there's something very central about religion, theocracy. So what is it about religion in India that accounts for, of course, its centrality, but at the same time its beauty? You were saying, and then आप कुछ कह रही थी ना शायद, बताइए. हाँ, एक सेकेंड जी. और जगह भी है टॉलरेंस, हमारे यहाँ थोड़ी कम है. और जगह भी है, हाँ. But yes, see, arguments, of course, religious tolerance, multi-religious, diverse, and so on. Yes, hero worship. Where's that going? How's that? Hero worship. Actually, that's the case across societies. Because we are quite a few, a billion odd people, anything we do, it becomes quite a statement. But okay, fair enough. So even that's to do with. So आप में से और कोई कुछ कह रहा था? If just in case I lost track, बताइए. Multiple languages. No, let's just settle this and then we come to language. So basically, see, the important thing, and we'll discuss this in more detail a bit later, but just to kind of get the clarification in place. See, the extraordinary thing about religion in India is that it is not compulsory, right? Yet, there is a certain affinity that most Indians have towards religion, the sentimentality part, right? So the interesting thing about India is that we are not supposed to be religious. At least that's not what the Constitution says. Of course, there's freedom of religion, but the Constitution, in no uncertain terms, is absolutely neutral about faith. You have a faith, you don't have a faith. You keep hopping. You can start your day as a Muslim, you can end your day as a Muslim again after sort of window shopping all around. It's perfectly all right. The Constitution does not have anything against that. So it's a fairly open space. Yet, there is something absolutely central about the ways in which religion, shall we say, helps us organize our day-to-day life. So in that sense, one would say that religion is very central in our day-to-day making sense of the world. Which is not to say that we don't have atheists, we don't have excellent Marxist, communist folks. Of course, we have all of that. Yet even Marxists have acknowledged that religion cannot really be done away with that easily in the subcontinent. It's quite a steroid in many ways, right? So in that sense, religion is quite exciting about. So when we say it's a salient feature, what we are essentially trying to point out is you cannot think about Indian society without due consideration to religion. And religion, again, not in terms of practice. Because if you get into that, it's a very sad figure. The data is not very exciting, right? So it is not to say that most Indians are religious in terms of, in the sense that they are very particular about their religious essentials. No, that's not the case. But they are very sentimental in the sense that I might not practice. That's an argument, right? I might not practice, but you say something about my religion and it'll be a problem. So in that sense, religion cannot be neglected. It's quite pivotal when we think about Indian society, right? So in that sense, we have to. So we need to have our reasons in place that yes, religion is there, but this is the reason why we are talking about religion. और बताइए, caste हो गया, religion हो गया, पूरी दुनिया में मेरे भाई. एक सेकंड रुक जाओ पेट्रियार्की पे. तो कैसे पकड़ें इसको पेट्रियार्की को? I can give you a few examples, but वही है वो थोड़ा, it's just bashing a few territories, but there are societies that are actually a bit more patriarchal than India. क्या करें? See, the point is the world, feminists would agree, left, right, and center, that The world happens to be unapologetically, brazenly patriarchal. It's just that patriarchy unfolds itself in different ways in different cultures. So, patriarchy in Finland is different. It's perhaps more subtle, more nuanced than patriarchy in India. Forget, Finland तक जाने की ज़रूरत भी नहीं है. इंडिया में ही अगर आप मेट्रोपॉलिटन, अर्बन, टाउन, प्रोविंशियल, विलेज, ऐसे अगर आप थोड़ा सा डिवीजन बनाएंगे, patriarchy's expressions actually vary. So the patriarchy of a typical gated community in Gurgaon, and these are all folks who are tech giants or whatnot, they are reasonably well educated, eloquent in English, fairly polished, the elite, but they are patriarchal. बट उनकी पेट्रियार्की बहुत सूदिंग है, उनकी पेट्रियार्की में कोई बुराई नहीं लगती है. गांव देहात की, आई एम नॉट डिफेंडिंग, राइट, बट खाप्स पेट्रियार्की comes across as very unsettling. I'm not saying, please don't misquote me. I'm not saying it should not be unsettling. Of course it is. And the society must do something about it, everything about it, in fact. But all I'm saying is that patriarchy unfolds itself in different ways. So, patriarchy के केस में थोड़ा मुश्किल है. Because the world, believe me, name a country, think of a damn human setup that is devoid of patriarchy. And you get the prize. There's no prize for this because there's no society. है ही नहीं. और वहीं के लोग वहीं के बताएंगे, नॉर्वे वॉर्वे कहेंगे हाँ भाई HDI में we are really charting the ranks, but there are all kinds of issues. Of course, it's more nuanced. It's way ahead of us in terms of even understanding the discourse, but it is there. तो work hours को लेके, labor के conception को लेकर के, industry के labor requirements क्या हैं, etc. Relationships, जब settlement claims होते हैं, that's when the judiciary kind of enters into a very patriarchal rant. तो उसको छोड़ देते हैं अभी patriarchy को. मतलब we will of course get there, but in a different context. What else? Cultural diversity. You were saying something. एक second. हाँ. अरे नहीं भाई, कैसे? नहीं. In UPSC we won't write that. Even if there is a degree of, let's not discuss this, right? So invasion is, again, it's a very problematic trope because invasion tells us that there were outsiders and there were insiders, and then there are descendants of outsiders and there are descendants of insiders. It leads to a very problematic present. So which is why in history as well now we think about dynasties, we think about wars, political battles differently. A lot of historians' work is committed to that sensitization, or vis-a-vis medieval history particularly. So let's not entertain that. Cultural diversity. क्या मतलब है इसका? How do you pitch that? हाँ. ठीक है. ठीक. तो इसके लिए कोई और can we think of a term that is perhaps more apt? Cultural diversity की जगह पे. So again, in political science, in sociology, in anthropology, पहला लफ्ज़ तो वही है, pluralism. And we'll come to this. Again, you see, pluralism is there in other societies as well. But believe me, as I said earlier as well, the pluralism in India, diversity is absolutely appalling. If you really travel across the length and breadth of this country, you will be surprised to no end as to what an extraordinary assembly this part of the world is. It's absolutely bizarre after a point. You just can't get your head around the diversity in terms of food practices and in terms of linguistic claims, in terms of various other things. Just in the case of religion, for example, within Islam, if you think about the diversity of Muslim religious practices across India, people from North India will not really consider that as Islamic. Stuff that's happening in Bengal, Assam, Manipur, Kerala, we'll say, they are out of religion. But these guys actually quite legitimately claim themselves as Muslims, right? Think of food practices. So I might run into a food culture that I just can't make sense of. And we become very racist very often while referring to these. जब हम कहते हैं ना कि अरे these people, they eat anything. That's a very racist remark, by the way. And we must refrain from that. That's not how we demonstrate Indianness. So this idea कि कुछ लोग तो कुछ भी खा लेते हैं. ये कौन लोग हैं भाई? And what's wrong in कुछ भी खा लेना? Well, that's their culture. They might say कुछ लोग कुछ भी नहीं खाते हैं. So how the hell does that help? Right? So it doesn't take us anywhere. It's a pointless exchange. So we have to, so cultural pluralism, the reason why we think about it is you cannot conceptualize India without thinking about this extraordinary diversity. And in that, you can refer to all kinds of things. So food, dress, and we'll come to this when we discuss caste. Food, dress, language, religion, and the list goes on. Beliefs, values, etc. Right? And as I said, that only when you, और ये travel को लेकर के भी ना, there's something so horrendously elitist about our travel claims. So if you go to a part of Jharkhand, you don't consider it as really traveling. Traveling is when you go abroad. Right? I was traveling last week. तो अगर कोई ऐसे पूछे आप कहाँ गए थे तो आप कहें I was in Bundelkhand. So this is this is very disappointing that you even consider that as an act of traveling. Going to Bundelkhand, for God's sake, wahan kya hai? But the point is, this is incredibly rich cultural landscape. You go to various parts of Jharkhand, you go to various parts of Odisha, and there's so much that you learn. Might not learn if you go to, so for example, again, just off the script, but there are many international schools in Delhi, NCR, that take their senior secondary students to Western Europe. Trip jata hai inka. So they take them to Budapest, to Vienna. अब ये पता नहीं ये लोग क्या सीख के आते हैं 4 दिन में वियना क्या देख लेंगे ये. But rather than that, ideally it should have been, you know, some of these incredible states of India where you have such a rich cultural repository waiting. But who the hell cares? The point is they will be taken to some city in Poland and in a day that's sorted. So Warsaw आपने एक दिन में सुबह से शाम में पूरा दिखा दिया और कुछ लिखवा दिया, and then you come to some other place, and then so in 4 days 4 cities of Europe, and then you're back, and then you have the audacity of claiming that you've been to 4 cities of Europe. You've seen nothing. Just Warsaw requires a month अगर आप तरीके से Second World War को समझने की कोशिश करें. So international, so traveling, we have to also understand, traveling also has a very elite, very peculiar connotation to it. So you're traveling to Odisha, you're not really traveling. It's a waste. But you're traveling to even Bhutan, ये फिर भी claim आ जाएगा इसमें. आप थोड़ा सा और ईस्ट में जाएंगे, fantastic. Singapore, Bangkok, Philippines, it's all travel. लेकिन यहाँ पर हिंदुस्तान में if you travel to different regions of India, in the northeast, in south, in west, in central India. So if you were to, and this is something that Gandhi did when he entered the subcontinent, before he embarked upon his extraordinary political career, also controversial, but nonetheless very charismatic and powerful political career, the man actually traveled across the length and breadth of the country. And it was important for him to understand the people, not to say that he truly understood them, but at least he took an initiative. There was some attempt on his part, and one must credit him for that. So he traveled across and he realized the incredible diversity of India that no other congressman had any idea about, because the Congress people were only traveling to places where the sessions of Congress were taking place. So it was either Bombay or Calcutta or Pune or Delhi. That's it, Madras. What else was there? So their understanding of India was very, very metropolitan, very urban. In fact, metropolitan wasn't really used then. Very urban. But Gandhi was somebody, which is why he could start his political career from the likes of Champaran, Kheda, etc. You know, these remote peripheries of India. So cultural pluralism, and India, as I said earlier as well, that the diversity of India is absolutely alarming. And I can say this on record, that there is no country in the world that is really a peer to India when it comes to the diversity. That's true, right? And I don't want to make this as a very patriotic, it's actually a very academic point that I want to make, right? चलिए, कास्ट, रिलीजन, कल्चरल प्लूरलिज्म, बस और कुछ नहीं है हमारे यहाँ. व्हाट एल्स? अरे आ गया भाई कल्चरल प्लूरलिज्म में. यू वर सेइंग इनबिल्ट वैल्यू सिस्टम. एग्जाम्पल दीजिए. सॉरी, कहाँ? जितने बड़े लोग हैं वो तो यही रोना रो रहे हैं कि कोई छोटे लोग इज्जत ही नहीं करते हैं. आप लोग कह रहे हैं. द एल्डरली कीप कंप्लेनिंग ऑल द टाइम एंड दे होल्ड एजुकेशन रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर दिस. जैसे पढ़ लिख के इन लोगों का दिमाग ज़्यादा ख़राब हो गया. आई डोंट थिंक अबाउट इट. एल्डरली का केस थोड़ा, दे आर they crib all the time, this lot. The elderly, just you sit with them, my goodness, they have a lot to crib. And I am almost there. हाँ, मैं उधरी उस तरफ, मैं उस सेक्शन की तरफ पहुंच रहा हूँ धीरे धीरे. Yes. किस बेसिस पर? Yes. But I think that's a theory, and that's applicable to other societies as well. नहीं? नहीं? केस बताओ यार. हमें तो लगता है बहुत सारे. सी अगेन, sorry, just a minute. See, it's also to do with who has committed suicide. Suicide किसने किया इस पे भी बात है. So if it's a celebrity, थोड़ा हाँ नाम मत लीजिए. Generally, you see, that's precisely the argument. I simply say celebrity and the name flashes, right? That's PR. But then there are so many manual scavengers. नहीं, मैं वही तो कह रहा हूँ, नहीं है. वो सेंसिटिव किसी खास कॉन्टेक्स्ट में हो जाती है. इसकी एक मैं मिसाल देता हूँ एंड देन वी कैन कम बैक टू व्हाट यू वांटेड टू से. Many years ago there were floods in Mumbai और काफ़ी devastating था. So one of the tragic snippets from the overall coverage is a doctor walking down the road and straight away slips into a manhole because पानी है और वो चल रहे हैं and he's crossing the road. The practicing doctor, he's crossing the road और उनको भाई नहीं पता चला और वो गटर में drowned to death. Now this is of course unfortunate. I don't think anyone can say कि अरे ये सब तो होता ही रहता. Of course not. But there was almost some sort of a national mourning. A lot of people were talking about it. Nothing wrong with it. Again, I think we must genuinely feel the sense of loss and the fact that this is infrastructural disaster. How can you possibly lose a person like that? And not because he was a doctor, कोई भी आदमी. But as we speak every day, there are quite a few sanitation workers who enter the gutters and don't come out alive. Every day. We are talking about dozens. Every day. इसको लेकर के कोई outrage है नहीं. There's just one person who's been writing about it and who's, as a crusader, sort of taking it up. Bijwada Wilson, he's the only civil society act. Of course, there are other civils, but he's the man who's talking about it for years now. तो कहने का मतलब ये है कि जान तो इन लोगों की भी जा रही है, या farmer suicides, और जान किसी डॉक्टर की भी चली गई, या so on. But then suddenly what happens is in relation to one suicide, I feel. And in relation to several other suicides, it's just news. So I think we have to also be very critical about it. कि क्या अगर देखिए सबको, if I genuinely believe in the fact that a human life matters regardless of caste, religion, economic credentials, then that's of course quite a remarkable progressive sentiment. But as far as, please correct me, I stand corrected, as far as my understanding goes, I don't think that's the case. तो बहुत सारी चीज़ों के बारे में लोगों को बहुत बोलना पड़ रहा है. जैसे farmer suicides, P. Sainath has been writing about it, he's been speaking about it like a mad person for decades now. अभी भी कोई, of course his contribution is immense, but बहुत ज़्यादा समाज में उतना कुछ, Dalit students committing suicide in IITs, in medical colleges, in universities, hasn't really led to a certain kind of an awakening across the country, right? So we have to think about it. I get the point, but let's also किसी भी proposition को हमेशा counter करने की भी कोशिश करें so that we come up with a more polished argument. ठीक, अब बताइए. Precisely. हाँ, it's a yearly thing. बिहार में floods काफ़ी अभी फिलहाल it has become more of a recurrent thing, but it's just it's quite, because it's also to do with who gets affected. So Assam still happens to be in some senses the periphery, right? कि एक जगह पे जाके हमारा बंगाल में मेन स्ट्रीम खत्म हो जाता है, फिर हमारा देन असम स्टिल इज क्लोजर टू द मेन स्ट्रीम, फिर उसके पीछे मणिपुर, नागालैंड, तो पता ही नहीं है क्या चल रहा है. So in that sense, right? Let's come back to, so what else? Caste, religion, cultural pluralism? नहीं, उसके लिए एक और मतलब कह सकते हैं, बट वो डिफाइनिंग सेलियंट फीचर्स, एक चीज इसके बारे में जरा सोचिए. आई नो यू गाइज विल हेट मी फॉर दिस, बट थिंक अबाउट इट. नहीं है? हाँ, कलेक्टिविज्म मतलब आई वॉज जस्ट थिंकिंग अबाउट इंस्टीट्यूशन, सो अ मोर डिसिप्लिनरी टर्म. जैसे इफ यू हैव टू चूज बिटवीन collectivism and joint family, I would say joint family hits it in a specific context, right? Religion is also collectivism in that sense. है क्या joint family? नहीं है. है नहीं, घबराने की जरूरत नहीं है. आप लोग बोल सकते नहीं है. है. It has lost its popularity. Okay, so see, the reason why I want to, I know this is actually a contested terrain, but let me just take my chances. I'm not again making this argument, and we don't really have any data, any conclusive data that were to kind of tell us that these many Indians live in joint households and these many Indians live in nuclear households. We don't have that data. Nonetheless, what I'm trying to share with you is that predominantly Indians are inclined towards joint settlements. At least this is something that much of our media also propagates. अभी भी हमारी फिल्मों में there is a certain element of jointness of family that is still क्या कहते हैं इसको, that's still drilled into us. The most iconic reference is DDLJ, which was of course quite a chartbuster in the 90s, and there's a brilliant piece written by a sociologist which is called Disciplining of Desire. So if you've seen the film, there is a way in which patriarchy sort of brings in the joint family narrative. So the hero keeps saying that we can always elope, right? We could just run away, but I want to rightfully claim you. Quite a bizarre thing. Given the film stage, but this idea that unless and until your alarmingly patriarchal father approves of our union, we are not going down this lane. We are not walking down the red carpet, right? It's very clear about it, and that's the reason why the film clicked, because the film actually brought an incredible blend of tradition and modernity. You need both. You sort of you tune up, you tone up the modernity part, people have problem, and you tone up the traditional part, people again have problem. Not that many though. So Aditya Chopra just nailed it. He said, all right, I'm giving you the ultimate blend here. So I'll get you the most immoral, the most relaxed guy, but at the same time someone who has, again, Indian values. He keeps referring to Indian values, Indian girl, Indian culture, nonsense in the film. I'm not saying it's nonsense in general. So this idea of joint. So what I'm pointing out is that maybe not most of us are living in joint family setups, but it is still something that is preferred. To give you an example, in most of the cases, if a person can afford to have their parents with them, I'm talking about a male member because there's also a patriarchy logic here, and does not get their parents, this person is usually looked down upon predominantly. Of course, things are changing because you also have the metropolitan suburban nuclear families wherein privacy is a very important aspect and there are new aspirations. And if parents enter, and there are many films that tell us that how the entry of parents actually ruin the lives of these newlyweds and so on, because they are not able to kind of have a moment of intimacy. There is no privacy. They can't really have junk food because the parents are all the time, this is surveillance 24/7. तो हर तरीके के मीडिया नैरेटिव्स हैं, बट एज आई वाज पॉइंटिंग आउट दैट वी स्टिल रिमेन प्रिडोमिनेंटली इंक्लाइंड टुवर्ड्स जॉइंट फैमिली. नाउ रिमेंबर, जॉइंट फैमिली इसलिए लिख दिया यहाँ पे बिकॉज दिस इज द रेफरेंस दैट आई थिंक मोस्ट ऑफ अस आर फेमिलियर विद, बट एक्चुअली द वर्ड इज जॉइंट हाउस होल्ड because family is an emotional unit. Family is an emotional unit. So family का मतलब ये ज़रूरी नहीं है. In anthropology, again, sociology, for a family, you do not have to have the same roof. So let's say I am living in India and my daughter is in Australia and my son is somewhere in California and my wife is working in some other place of the world, but we are a family. These are divided transnational families, but these are families. तो family एक emotional reference होता है, और अगर emotional reference है, और करण जौहर ने इसको बहुत इस्तेमाल किया है without reading anthropology, this idea that even if you are continents apart, there's a certain bond that keeps you together. So there is, which is why in sociology we make a distinction between family and household. तो जब आप household की बात करते हैं तो household का मतलब है residential reference. It's an empirical residential reference. Family है एक psychological emotional reference. तो इसीलिए when people say joint families are disintegrating, that's a wrong statement. That's a wrong framing of the problem, or let's say of the development, not problem, because that's a value. The right framing is joint households are disintegrating. Right? Okay. So joint family and एक चीज और रह गई, बताइए. Is strong bond not part of Indian society? हाँ बताइए. इसीलिए सबको कमाना चाहिए. I didn't get it. This is quite a thread. Wait. So एक चीज है bonds, कि आपस में लोगों के रिश्ते. See, what I'm saying is that if you have to think about a feature, right? Then if we say social bonds, now social bond is a very general reference. Social bonds तो किसी भी समाज में होंगे. जो हमने पहले बात करी थी ना, interaction. And those of you who've done a bit of sociology, Durkheim, Emile Durkheim has written an entire treatise on this, division of labor, in which he talks about social bonds and links. तो ये तो डर्कहाइम के हिसाब से, एंड आई थिंक ही इज़ राइट, कि हर समाज में रिश्ते और कनेक्शंस लोगों के बीच में होंगे. नाउ व्हाट्स द बेसिस ऑफ दैट कनेक्शन, व्हाट्स द बेसिस ऑफ दोज लिंकेजेस, व्हाट अकाउंट्स फॉर दैट सोशल सीमेंट कैन वेरी फ्रॉम वन सोसाइटी टू अनदर. ठीक, तो हो सकता है हिंदुस्तानी समाज में उसकी बेसिस कुछ और हो, रिलीजन हो सकता है, सर्विस एक तरीके का आइडिया विच कम्स फ्रॉम रिलीजन हो सकता है, कास्ट हो सकता है, आइडेंटिटीज हो सकती हैं, बाहर हो सकता है इकोनॉमिक बेसिस हो उसकी. राइट? सो व्हेन आई एम सो सोशल बॉन्ड्स या इवन कलेक्टिविज्म, ऑल्दो ऑफ कोर्स अ टेक्निकल सोशियोलॉजिकल टर्म, बट व्हेन वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट फीचर्स एंड यू से joint family, now that's a keyword, and that's closer to the discipline in which we are operating right now, social science broadly. तो इसलिए जाहिर है आप कास्ट के अंदर भी बॉन्ड्स हैं. कास्ट तो चल ही नहीं सकता बॉन्ड्स के बना. कास्ट सॉलिडारिटीज एसेंशियली आर ड्रिवन बाय लिंकेजेस, बॉन्ड्स एटसेट्रा. एंड सिमिलरली रिलीजन में है, कल्चर के अंदर भी कम से कम, मतलब प्लूरलिज्म तो है, बट विद इन, लेट्स से इफ वी बिलोंग टू द सेम कल्चर, देयर इज अ सर्टेन बॉन्ड दैट वी शेयर विद ईच अदर. बट वी विल नॉट राइट बॉन्ड और सोशल बॉन्ड एज अ फीचर, बिकॉज ये बहुत जेनेरिक हो जाएगा. तो अगर हम लिखते हैं रिलीजन, अगर हम लिखते हैं कास्ट, नाउ दीज आर कीवर्ड्स, and that these keywords help us nail down the features of Indian society. तो उस सेंस में joint family. Before we call it a day, there's one more that you did not, and again, slightly contested, but I'm taking my chances. आपको लग रहा होगा कहाँ की बात हो रही है पुरानी, but as we speak, 65% of India still resides in its villages. Not really very excited about it, but they have no other option. Village. Again, try and understand that maybe if we were to take this up a decade and a half later, perhaps village won't make the cut, unfortunately, given what all is happening in the agricultural landscape and what all is happening in the rural side of the country. Things are really downhill. So every passing year, things only get more alarming for them. And they have no other option but to leave the countryside and do whatever they can. But remember, there are two things. One is, in terms of population, they still constitute the majority, right? The rural population of India, the latest. We don't have the latest census, but whatever little we have in terms of NSSO and the rest. The other is that quite a few who are in Delhi or who are in different cities actually don't want to stick around. So if you talk to some of the, it's an interesting exercise. If you talk to some of the e-rickshawalas, right? Now, these are not Delhiites. They are people who've come from different parts of course, for the most part, Delhi invites people from immediate peripheries. So UP, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Haryana, yes, and Bihar. मतलब बहुत आगे गए तो आप बंगाल. You won't really run into people from Odisha, from Andhra Pradesh, because ये जनता जा रही है बॉम्बे, ये आपको उधर मिल जाएंगे, या फिर बैंगलोर. So migration also has a certain geographical sense. So when you talk to them, and not just e-rickshawalas, even cab drivers. So some of them, in fact, most of them, to my surprise, actually come from farming families. And given a chance, they would just go back, provided there is a certain surety of survival, dignified survival. And in fact, the reason why I spoke about manual rickshawalas and e-rickshawalas is because they are the lowest rung. तो ये तो जिसको हम sociology में कहते हैं circular migration. So these are people who actually go back to the villages when it's the harvest season. And they work in their fields and they work in the fields of others as agricultural laborers, and they get some money, and then they are back in Delhi. So most of the rickshawalas, they are never there on Delhi roads round the year. For 4 months, they are actually back home. And e-rickshawalas as well, because of their, for the lack of a better word, precarity. They are between the worlds. So they are in the city. But the fact of the matter is, they don't really want to be in the city, contrary to what we think. गांव से आ जाते हैं जब देखो तब. The point is, they are really not happy about Delhi. And I don't think anyone should be, given the state of affairs, environment and whatnot. I think village is a decent bet. But the point is, if you will die in the village, then you better do whatever you can to just live a little longer. But even in that case, when COVID outbreak sort of went beyond our imagination, a lot of folks simply went back regardless. So even if it meant walking several hundred kilometers, they just walked, because they were very clear, if you have to die, you better die with your loved ones around, right? You can't die in a city that cares for no one. So village in that sense is still, I'm not at all making this argument that India is a land of villages. I don't think that's really an argument that we can make now. Maybe 30 years ago, this was an argument that still had some currency to it. But right now, we can't really make that argument. India, I'm not at all making this claim. But as we speak, majority of India still lives in villages. And there is more to it, and we'll get into this. So please don't think that we are getting done. I'm just flagging some of the important features of Indian society so that we have a certain blueprint in mind for what is lined up. So when we meet next, go ahead. Yes, tradition and modernity, continuum, one could say. Yeah. But that is something that I wanted to discuss separately. अच्छा, उसी से याद आया, आप ही लोग तो कह रहे थे, देखिए भूल गए. It would have been a sin, unity in diversity. कैसे कोई इस क्लास से बाहर निकल सकता है इसके बगैर. Although I think this is a contested domain, but we will discuss this nonetheless. So tradition, yeah, जिसको हम कहते हैं, there are sociologists who've written about this. It's called Indian modernity, meaning हमारा modernity कुछ अलग ही चीज़ है, right? So the tradition of modernity tradition continuum, बहुत अलग अलग तरीके से इसके बारे में लोगों ने लिखा है. So these are the 6 features that we will adhere to in the next 2 classes perhaps. So what we'll do in days to come is we will take up each of these very briefly. I won't go into the details because these are in themselves, semester long courses. And there are courses that are taught on caste, on family, on village. So we will simply, जो UPSC GS1 में जितनी ज़रूरत है, उसके हिसाब से we'll try to do as much value addition as we can so that when you write, your answer is decisively above, or it has a decisive edge over your competitors. So we will look into caste in detail, a little bit of detail. We will look into religion, cultural pluralism, joint family, village, unity and diversity. So that's what the plan is. And once that is done, then we will look into previous year questions, particularly from this subunit. Koi sawal? You have had a long day. All right. Although I think the class ends at 5:20. No, don't worry. I will end the class. I'm just asking. ये मत सोचेगा अरे ये फिर 10 मिनट और पढ़ा देंगे अभी. But just correct me, right? The class ends at 5:20. All right. Enough for today. Thank you.